My journey into plumbing started when I was very young. It's a blend of success, failure, and even some family drama. Because in reality, my journey into plumbing is very much a journey through a significant part of my own life. So it's very interweaved with various elements of my life. I've actually been going on job sites since as far back as I can remember. My father is a plumber and opened his business in 1997. I was a young boy at the time, and I have vivid memories of being on various job sites with him. Naturally, at that young an age, I wasn't exactly working, but I would still watch him and he would tell me about what he was doing. I may have spent more time using plumber's putty as silly putty at that age, but by the age of 8, I knew the difference between a 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch pipe, and I could correctly identify various fitting types, including explaining the difference between a 90-degree fitting and a quarter bend. I spent quite a few summers riding along with my father. We repiped many homes together, replaced water heaters in attic spaces, and dug many trenches for new water lines. I also learned that I was going to have to overcome my fear of spiders, as there was a lot of crawl space work to be done. In fact, I have a very distinct memory of being at the entrance of a crawl space that I needed to go through. There were webs and quite a few spiders around. At the time, I was terrified of spiders, even self-proclaiming to have arachnophobia. I had to make a decision in that moment. I had to push through that fear and get to work. Today, I still don't like spiders, and I would much prefer not to come in contact with one, but I'm also capable of working around them without panic, and I attribute that day as the beginning of my overcoming of this fear. As I entered my teen years, I began working a bit more with him. I was homeschooled during much of this time, which allowed me more flexibility to help out on jobs as the needs came up. It always seemed that the jobs I would participate on were pretty awful jobs, at least from the perspective of a young teen. Running water lines in the attic during Georgia summers, hand digging trenches for new water lines, working around raw sewage, etc. As it turned out, this had actually been by design. My father later told me that he actually intentionally had me come out on the more nasty and physically demanding jobs. He wanted me to see that being a plumber was not easy work, was not fun work, and he wanted me to find something else to do with my life. The irony is that my plumbing skill set was ever expanding. During this time, I learned to connect CPVC piping together. That was the primary pipe we used. Don't hold that against me. I was not running my own jobs. I learned to install faucets and toilets, and even develop a basic understanding of how water heaters went together and how to test water pressure in a home. Essentially, while his goal was to get me to want to be anything but a plumber, the reality was he was setting me up for plumbing success. This off and on, mostly summer work, continued for quite a few years. Eventually, I graduated high school and began a college program that was offered by my local church. I wasn't plumbing during this time period because I was focusing exclusively on schooling, but I wound up getting a speeding ticket on the way to church one morning. My parents told me that they would not pay for the ticket, understandably, and that I would need to get a real job in order to earn the money to pay it. That's how I ended up becoming a pizza delivery driver, a job that I actually enjoyed quite a bit, but which paid a miserable amount of money and was putting heavy wear and tear on my car. It was for those reasons that when I got engaged to my now wife, I decided I needed to find a different source of income. There was only one natural career path I could think of that I already understood and that had the potential to provide a proper income for my family. So I called my father up and asked him if I could go back to work with him. He agreed, but on a couple of conditions. I would no longer be working as a grunt assistant. Instead, I would begin to learn the trade as a proper apprentice. I would work full-time, no longer just off and on throughout the week. And, in order to turn the business into something which could provide for both of us, I would take the lead on helping to grow and expand the company, which at this point was just the two of us. I agreed to the terms and was really excited to see where this would lead. So, I put in my 2-week notice to Papa John's and found myself as a proper apprentice plumber. I was still doing the hard task, for sure, but I was also learning the ins and outs of everything residential service, as well as a light amount of commercial work too. Before long, I could rebuild just about any faucet, diagnose and repair problems with toilets, and I even single-handedly repiped an entire home that a general contractor had burned down. It was around this time that Georgia experienced one of the harshest freezes that we have endured in quite some time. In fact, to date, it's still the harshest freeze that I can recall in my own memory. The outside temperature went to single digits and stayed there for days. Now, those of you who are in colder climates may laugh at the idea of that being an extreme freeze, but you have to understand that not only are our homes not constructed to withstand that type of weather, but many of those who own and live in the homes are not familiar with what to do when freezing conditions occur. This resulted in a tremendous amount of work not only for us, but for every plumbing company around. In fact, if my memory serves me correctly, We were accustomed to roughly 3 to 5 phone calls per day at that time, and we received over 200 within the first 3 days of the freeze. We ended up doing the same thing that every other company we spoke with was doing. We got to who we could get to and put everyone else on a waiting list. Meanwhile, we were working long hours. This week of significant work allowed us to afford to put a down payment on a second van and completely stock it with supplies, which allowed me to be able to run jobs out of a proper work vehicle rather than just the little sedan that I was previously taking to job sites. In addition to learning the trade and running service calls, it was also my responsibility to build up the company image and learn to market ourselves so that we could afford to hire more plumbers and grow the company. My wife and I set up a Facebook page, designed a website, and I even began to send out a monthly company newsletter to all the customers who were interested in subscribing. We also set about asking customers to leave us Google reviews. I also spent quite a bit of time attending various business seminars, conventions, and expos, and began training on SEO, or search engine optimization. As time went on, things proved to be successful, and we became busier than ever, eventually to the point that we were able to afford an office and warehouse location and hire another plumber to help us run some of the jobs. This also brought with it a new element to my own role with the company, that of a manager. Now, this was a bit of a precarious situation for me because I wasn't yet a licensed plumber myself, so I wanted to be respectful of that fact while working alongside the various licensed plumbers who would join up with us over the next year. But I was also highly trained and found myself having to instruct them on how to properly go about various repairs. Now, if you are a plumber, you are probably already aware that many of us have our own ways we like to do things, and we are going to naturally butt heads on whether or not we're doing something the right way, just because it's not our way, even if both of us are doing a job that is code approved and high quality. That's not what I'm talking about. As an example, there was one instance when I rode along with one of the licensed plumbers to evaluate a scenario where a customer's toilet handle would continuously break no matter how many times they would replace it. The moment I looked at the toilet, I knew exactly what was occurring and what needed to be done. But the plumber we had hired was visibly confused at the situation. I waited until the customer had left us alone and politely asked him if he would like some assistance with diagnosing it. That's when I was able to explain to him that with this particular toilet, there is a gasket that goes bad and gets stuck to another part within the tank, and that when this occurs, it puts excess strain on the tank lever when in use, causing it to break. Replacing tank levers would not fix the problem until the faulty gasket was replaced. Fortunately, the day came when I was eligible to take the exam for my own license. Despite having grown up in the industry, most of the time spent was not on record. So it took some time upon becoming a proper apprentice before I had accumulated the field time required by state law to test for my license. The exam is not an easy one. Our company focused almost exclusively on residential service work, which was only a minor percentage of what the test was actually on. Each exam is unique, made up of different questions, but a majority of mine were on sky rises, blueprint reading, and even sizing roof drains, which is something that plumbers in my area don't even do. I studied harder for this exam than I had for anything else. I also took an exam prep class close to exam time. Many in the class were opening their code books for the first time. I was actually so well versed in the topics by that point that I recall pointing out an error to the professor. He was a cool guy and took the correction well. Though that was my first time meeting him, we're actually friends today. Some take the exam multiple times before they pass. I'm proud to say that I passed the exam on my first attempt, and I was the first to do so that day, having completed the 6-hour exam in 1.5 hours. I went home and celebrated with my family. Alright, they say all good things come to an end. Unfortunately, that was the case for my time with my father's company. What began as an exciting adventure eventually took a darker turn. I want to be mindful about how I share the details in this next phase because it does involve family drama. So I'm going to do my best to give you a clear and concise understanding of what happened for the story's sake, but without getting too detailed and making it too messy and ugly. It was during this season of my life that my parents began to move towards getting a divorce. Unknown things had come to light, and there was initially an attempt at reconciliation, but it proved to be insufficient to sustain the marriage. The divorce process was long and very messy. It also marked the beginning of a transition point in my father's life to an individual who I unfortunately don't recognize today. Remaining in my position with the company was taking a significant toll on my health and well-being. It was becoming very common for me to exhibit physical symptoms from the stress I was enduring. I won't share the specifics here, other than to say that my father had checked out mentally from the company, and he had handed the entire business over to me in every way except legally. He couldn't legally put it in my name during the divorce process, but he assured me he would do so once it was official, and told me face to face that the company was mine to do with as I wished, even to the point of shutting it down if that was my desire. This was already a time of high stress, but became greater as our company entered into a slow season. Our employees were paid on an hourly basis, and if there was insufficient work to keep them busy enough to earn full-time hours, I took that personally. The lack of workload also brought with it trying financial times. At the suggestion of a mentor, I took out a line of credit from our bank. The idea wasn't to borrow from it, but simply for it to be there to provide a degree of peace of mind to myself, which was something I desperately needed. However, that peace of mind turned to dread when one morning I logged into the bank account, which was my daily ritual, and saw that 96% of that line of credit had been used by my father to take his girlfriend on a lavish vacation. At that point, I began to think outside of the box for ways to keep the business afloat. Since there was already a lack of work to go around for myself and the other plumbers, my father was no longer working in the field or spending much time in the office, I reached out to a friend who owned a local home inspection company. I was offered a job, which I accepted, training to become a home inspector. The home inspection job was on a subcontractor basis, which meant that I had full control over my schedule. The plan was to earn what I could from the home inspections so that I wouldn't have to take as much payroll from the company, while also keeping more jobs available for the plumbers who were working for me. I spent a couple of months training as a home inspector and actually got certified as an InterNACHI inspector. However, my father disagreed with this decision and told me that I needed to decide whether I wanted to continue to be a part of the plumbing company or being a home inspector, that he would not approve me to keep working with the plumbing company and be an inspector at the same time. This was something I found rather odd, as he had stepped away from running the plumbing calls to pursue a career in real estate, despite still taking a heavy payroll from the company every week. My wife and I spent a few days giving consideration to this ultimatum, and ultimately, though I love and appreciate the employees who worked for me, I still do, and I felt like I was betraying them. We both unanimously agreed that it would be a better choice to step away from the plumbing business. It was currently a sinking ship, and while I was holding the responsibility of being the captain, I was also not provided with the freedom and authority needed to make the hard decisions to salvage things. This was resulting in a very unhealthy environment for myself and my marriage, but it was also not beneficial for the company either. We made the decision for me to step away from the family business and to start doing home inspections full-time. Despite it being the obvious decision, it was still a very hard one to make. For years, I had my heart set on the day that I would take over the company, and this permeated into my personal life as well. My family would watch Duck Dynasty together, and it would naturally cause both my father and myself to think of our own business and how the reins would one day be handed to me. It was, for a very long time, a dream that seemed to be coming closer to reality. I made the decision to step away from my own mental health, for the financial stability of my wife and I, and also for the financial stability of my father's business, which is still thriving today. But it was one of the saddest moments of my life. So, at this point, I was officially gone from the company and was operating as a home inspector. My plan was to remain a home inspector and let that be my long-term career, in part because I wanted to honor my father by not becoming one of his competitors. However, as I had already learned, things don't always work out the way we desire them to. Shortly after leaving the company, work for the inspection company dried up, and I was being sent on fewer and fewer inspections. At this point, my personal savings account was depleting fast, and my wife had gotten a job working at Kroger. I felt it was my responsibility to provide a living for my family, but here I was sitting at home most days, just hoping for an inspection to come in. At the same time, the owner sent me over a non-compete clause, letting me know that all their inspectors were required to sign it. The clause stated that I would not perform home inspections for any of their competitors while working for them, or for 2 years afterward. I emailed him back, respectfully explaining that I had actually stepped away from my plumbing business at this point, and was relying solely on them for income, and that while they were currently unable to provide much work for me, the non-compete wasn't something I was comfortable signing. I did assure him that performing home inspections for a competitor would be my absolute last resort, and I would hold out as long as possible while hoping work picked up for them. Sadly, I was let go after that email. This was the darkest moment of my life. I had gone from providing a living for my family to stepping away from my dream job, and now losing my backup job. My wife was the only one in the house making an income, and our savings account was nearly dried up as our bills outweighed her earnings. The very last thing I wanted to do was go to work as a plumber for another company. That would have been complete and utter defeat for me, especially after having the freedom of being able to make my own schedule with both previous jobs. However, I resigned myself to doing so. I called a friend who operates a large, successful company on the north side of Atlanta and asked him for a job. He told me he would see what he could do and would report back. It was late in the evening, but I also plan to call around to many of the larger companies in the Atlanta area the next day and apply for a job. One positive thing about being a licensed plumber who excels at his craft is that you can pretty much expect to be offered a job on the spot if you call enough places. I got a call from a friend that evening, another local tradesman in a different field of work who had been up to date on how things were going for me. He told me that he had a networking meeting the very next morning and asked me to attend as his guest. He requested I hold off on job hunting, at least until after the meeting, and just see what would come of it. I agreed. The meeting was early enough in the morning that I likely wouldn't have reached a live person at a plumbing office had I called at that time anyway, so I figured what harm could it do? While I can't say that the meeting itself amounted to anything, taking a brief break before moving forward proved to be exactly what I needed. Sometimes I get so fixated on plans and my mind runs full speed ahead to the point that I don't make room to hear from God. When I'm driving, however, that's one of the few times when my brain naturally calms down, and I've had a number of encounters that I would call God encounters. This morning was one such encounter. As I was driving away from the meeting, I felt as if God was telling me that I was not meant to call other companies for a job, that I was to hold out and let Him show up for me. I called my wife, terrified to inform her that after we had discussed me getting a job with a plumbing company to provide for the family, I felt I was to hold out. Amazingly, she accepted this information with the utmost grace and didn't even question it. At this point, I had an unusual peace that I was meant to hold off on job hunting and instead offer up my own plumbing services to the community. There were a couple of logistical and legal steps to take. Fortunately, I had already formed an LLC. When I went to work as a home inspector, the work was contracted to me. I wasn't technically an employee. As such, they had recommended that I form an LLC for legal protection. So I already had an official business in a similar industry, as well as a business bank account, insurance, and licensing. I changed the last part of the name from services to plumbing and updated the necessary people of the shift from inspections to plumbing. The only other hiccup was that while I was already a licensed journeyman plumber, I did not yet hold a master plumber license. I had every intention of earning this license, but I had not yet held the journeyman license for a long enough period to be eligible to take the master exam. The state of Georgia requires that a licensed master plumber be a part of any company performing plumbing. That individual is usually the owner of the company, but that isn't necessarily the requirement. The law simply requires a master plumber to be on payroll. So I called up a friend who already had his master's license, and I asked if he would be willing to go on payroll for me to allow me to operate completely legally. We agreed to a price, and then, just to completely verify I was in the clear, I spoke with my attorney and got his approval as well based on his own understanding of the law. I was now officially in business. However, I was very much operating on a thread. I posted on Nextdoor, letting the neighbors know about my little business. Soon after, I received a call at around 6 p.m. from a community member who was having a problem with her toilet. My family has a small SUV, and that is what I drove out to her house, along with my meager little set of tools. Most of the tools which I had previously used belonged to the other company, and they did not go with me. Once on site, I looked things over and gave her a couple of options on how we could proceed with the repair. She made a selection, and off I went to Home Depot to purchase parts as well as a couple of additional tools needed for the job. I returned, fixed up her problem, and collected a check. I then used my laptop to write up a receipt on Microsoft Word. While I did provide a high-quality repair, the entire experience was less than professional, but sometimes that's how you have to start, and my pricing was in line with where I was at as a business. In other words, I made very little on that job. What I did make, though, allowed me to print a few business cards, purchase some generic invoices from an office store, and get set up to accept credit cards. As the days went on, I would receive more calls from potential customers. Not all of these opportunities turned into paying jobs. At the time, I wasn't charging anything to drive out and evaluate a job. I honestly didn't feel that I was at a professional enough level to justify doing so. I had a ladder strapped to the roof bars of my little SUV, some pipe strapped to the ladder, and a series of bins of tools and fittings that I would slowly accumulate from jobs inside of the trunk. I was honestly so embarrassed by my vehicle situation that when possible, I would intentionally park as far from the front door as possible so that customers couldn't see my vehicle, even if that meant walking further between the job and the vehicle. I still wasn't making enough money to make ends meet, at least not yet. However, as word of mouth referrals began to build, I was able to earn enough to at least offset some of the expenses that we had as a family and slow the process of draining what little savings we still had in our bank account. My inventory of tools and products was slowly building as well, which was enabling me to keep more of the money that I received from jobs in my pocket. Then one cold winter afternoon, when our savings was almost depleted, I received a call from a landlord of a small business storefront. The water heater in the attic had begun to leak. I drove out to the location, very hopeful that I would be awarded this job. I had actually been able to take care of a couple of smaller jobs earlier that week, and I knew that if I could get this one too, it would be the first week since I left my previous business that I would actually earn enough money to cover all of our expenses. It was a particularly cold day, and ice storms were on the horizon. I arrived that afternoon and looked the job over with the landlord. It was a small 6-gallon tank, just big enough to allow hot water to the bathroom faucet, and just small enough that I could handle replacement via the pull-down staircase on my own. I put a quote together for him, one that I knew was a very good price, under $1,000 total, including the tank, installation in the attic, as well as various code upgrades. He mulled it over, and then declined, telling me that he would have his handyman take care of it. Now, I didn't let it show, but I was devastated. I had my hopes so high of being able to actually make ends meet that week that I just felt like a failure all over again. This was also the last day of the week, so when this job came back declined, I had no other prospects to earn what I needed. I began the drive home, and snow began to fall as it did. About halfway to the house, the landlord actually called me back. He told me he couldn't reach his handyman, and that he just wanted to get the job done. He asked if I'd still do so. I happily told him I would. As soon as I got off the phone with him, I called my supplier. They were actually getting ready to close up early today because the winter storms were projected to ice the roads over. But they went ahead and stayed open long enough for me to show up, pick up the water heater, and various material. By the time I got to the job site, there was already a thin layer of snow on the ground. We had to wait a while before getting tenant approval to shut water off to the building, but once we did, I got to work. It took a few hours to get the job done. It was a difficult attic to navigate on my own with a water heater, even a small one, and the added wait time before we were able to shut water off meant that the sun had long since set before I was completed and able to start the careful drive home. That evening, driving home alone in the snow was an emotional time for me. The landlord had written me my check. If you aren't in the industry, $1,000 for a water heater swap out might sound like a lot of money, at least for back then. But my profit on it was actually very little. However, it was enough that added with the earnings from other jobs that week, I had officially earned enough money to cover that week's expenses. I was pretty sure that crying while driving through a snowstorm at night wasn't the safest idea, but I really couldn't help myself either. I was so thankful. From that week forward, it was like I had pushed through an invisible barrier that was just waiting to be opened. I was able to provide for my family every week from then on out. Granted, this didn't mean I had much, if anything, left over, but I was able to provide at least enough to cover my family's living expenses and that of my new little business. Within a few months, it was actually common for me to end the week with just a little bit more left over after all expenses than when it began. It was time to start considering getting a proper work vehicle. I had now spent many months working out of the family SUV. Not only was this embarrassing and portrayed a less than professional image than I was looking to portray, but the fact that it was the family vehicle meant that every single day I had to set it up for work and every single day dismantle the systems I would put together so that it was again functional as a family vehicle. I was getting so tired of doing this. I had spent the last couple of months slowly setting aside my profits from jobs to the point that I felt I could make a reasonable down payment if I could find the right van. I was a bit worried about the added expense of a monthly payment as well as the increase in auto insurance, but I also decided that having a professional vehicle would be the last step I needed to feel comfortable charging a service fee to come visit a home. Now, I didn't want to increase my overall charges, so I decided to apply the entirety of the service fee towards the cost of the job, and I still do this today. But charging a fee would mean I would at least earn something to help cover my time and fuel if I were to go out and look at a job and then be turned away. Despite my low prices for service, it was actually fairly common at the time that someone would call me to their home, have me determine what needs to be done to fix the problem, and then thank me for the diagnostic and tell me they can handle the job themselves now that they know what they need to do. I'm not against helping others do their own work, as I hope is evident by many of the videos here on my channel, but I couldn't continue to drive out for free to do this once I was paying the expenses for a proper work van, nor did I feel it was fair for this to be expected of me. I spent some time searching and eventually settled on what I felt would be a good fit for me at a price point I could afford. I proudly drove home my first work van, a Ford E350 with an extended body. I still have this van today, and honestly, I love it. Unfortunately, within 24 hours of bringing it home, I noticed a problem with it. Turns out the transmission was going bad and had to be entirely rebuilt. This was naturally quite disappointing, but it had to be done, so I took it to a mechanic who I trust, and he got to work on it for me. That's when another huge blessing came along. My grandfather had heard about my van purchase and heard about the problem with the transmission. He extended an amazing offer to cover the cost of the repair for me. I love my grandparents. They are amazing people, and I'm very grateful to still have them in my life. They are the type of people who will step in to fill a need, especially if they see that the person in need is already giving it their best and could just genuinely use a helping hand. They are inspiring, and I hope to one day be in a position where I can do the same for others. So now, here we are. I finally have a van, I have magnetic business cards, custom-made paper invoices, and custom-printed shirts. I look the part, I am the part. It was a very proud moment to drive that van to the first customer I would service with it. From then on, things continued to excel. I reached a point where I was constantly staying busy, so much so that I actually began to slowly narrow down my service area so that I could focus on operating with greater efficiency. As is going to be the case with any business, there were busy times and there were slow times, but I've always been able to make ends meet since that fateful night in the snow. I continued to focus on providing a high level of quality and a high level of customer service to every individual who would reach out to me. I earned my own master's license, once again passing the exam my first time around, and once again being the first one to complete the exam that day. Eventually, I found myself with over 100 reviews on Google, all of them 5-star. In 2021, I was nominated for the title of Best of Georgia. The Georgia Business Journal holds an open vote every year where anyone can vote for their favorite business. I was a regional winner for the plumbing category that year. This astounded me because I was up against companies from all over the state, some of which service the entire state and have a large fleet of vehicles. The fact that me and my van could garner enough votes to be a regional winner was amazing. I wasn't let down by the fact that I didn't actually officially win Best of Georgia because I figured there was no way that would even be possible. Until it happened in 2022, and 2023, and 2024, and actually I'm not allowed to announce the results of this year's just yet. So that's my story so far. I'm just a guy who grew up plumbing, learned to love the trade, and has been on a wild ride ever since. It hasn't always been simple, and I'd be lying if I said there weren't times that I thought it would be easier to just work for someone else. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't trade this path I'm on for any other job. To tie the story up, there is one more notable life update, and it involves my wife. I mentioned earlier that she has gone to work at Kroger. The Kroger location had a Starbucks, and she eventually shifted to working at their little Starbucks kiosk within the store, which ultimately led to her moving to a proper Starbucks location where she has excelled as a barista. She has been there throughout the entirety of this journey. But now that our second child has been born, she is transitioning to be a stay-at-home mom again. My channel just got monetized, and that's definitely going to be helpful with offsetting the cost of health insurance without Starbucks. But ultimately, it's through the plumbing business that she has the opportunity to, at long last, go back to being a stay-at-home mom. Through the plumbing business, and through God's grace to guide us through this process and bless our endeavors. If I can give one piece of advice to any startup business owners out there, it would be this: trust God. This doesn't have to mean that you sit still and do nothing, but trust Him. I found that He often likes to wait until the 11th hour to come through for us. Likes to wait until we realize we just can't do this without Him. But He does come through. Trust Him. Are you still there? I guess I can let you know one more thing. Something I get asked pretty frequently. Why the fedora? I didn't include it in the main story because it's actually kind of silly the way it came about. I had been growing my hair out for a while, trying to see how I liked long hair, and I didn't like it. I couldn't manage it, it was very unkempt, it was awful. But at some point, while I still had the long hair, I decided to make another video for the channel. And since my hair couldn't be tamed or controlled, I reached for a hat. The nearest one was a fedora. I made the video, filmed it, published it, put it online, all that. Didn't really think anything else of it. Shortly thereafter, I asked a friend of mine, who was an artist, to come up with a new logo for my business. My current logo at the time had just been my business name and some cool font, but I wanted a logo that actually was just its own picture without any text. So I asked him if he would do this for me. I told him I didn't have anything in particular in mind, that he had free reign to come up with what he wanted to come up with. Turned out, he went to my most recent video, that video, for inspiration. Next thing I knew, he had put together this really cool picture of a cartoon version of myself with a pipe wrench wearing a fedora. I loved it, but I thought it would be a little bit weird if my logo is me in a fedora, which I feel like is a pretty eye-catching item, and yet I go to a customer's house not wearing a fedora. So, I donned the fedora, and the rest is history. Now you know.